It's a big difference to be like, you need one gold coin versus like you need the heads of 3 different breeds of goats and they need to be hung upside down from ropes from an apple tree. This condition is an absolute must material component of the spell, and then the goat heads will take the energy from the apple tree and be consumed to cast the spell, right? So obviously there's going to be a lot of like legwork and just effort put into even assembling those material components. You have to ask yourself, what problem does this spell solve? Not how strong is it? What situation does it create, right? If you can't answer this simple question, it's probably time to revisit. Hello friends, welcome back to GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher. Today we're talking about something that I actually get asked a lot about, and there's a lot of conversation about in our community, which is how do you create good homebrew spells in D&D? Now, some people are really against homebrew spells. Some people really love to do this. Personally, I'm a big fan of it, but there's a question of how to create them well, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We don't want to create broken homebrew spells, obviously. We don't want meme spells that are just ridiculous and nonsense, right? Sometimes there's a funny spell, but for the most part, we want spells that feel cool. We want spells that feel like they are official spells. They feel like they respect the system you're playing with. They create good story moments or lead to better story moments. They add options instead of unnecessary or unhealthy power creep. And we want spells that actually make your game better, okay? And that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. And I'm going to give you 2 real examples of this. One example, I'm going to show you a spell that I created, one of my favorite homebrew spells that I've ever created, called Flight of the Lepidoptera, which is like a flight spell. And then I'm also going to show you a spell that was created as part of our January homebrew spell contest in the GM Philosophy Discord. The winner of that spell was Padre, and he created a spell called Menson's Herdigersation. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but we're going to dive into it. It's really cool, and I think it won for a really good reason. I'm going to kind of break it down in this video. By the end of this video, you're going to have a clear framework for, first of all, what makes a homebrew spell good, what usually tends to make them bad when they don't work, how to design your own homebrew spell, make it awesome for your table, and then how to evaluate spells that players may bring you to your table. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. So let's dive in and first of all discuss part 1, which is what makes most homebrew spells fail. Before we talk about what works, let's talk about what usually doesn't work, okay? Most bad homebrew spells fail for one of 4 different reasons. Number 1, they just try to replace existing spells. This is probably the biggest sin with homebrew. If your spell is just like fly, but a little better, or fireball, but a little cooler, or invisibility, but a little stronger, then you didn't really design a spell. You power crept the system, and you kind of added flair to existing spells, which is fine. Adding some homebrew flair to these things is great. These aren't really homebrew spells per se. Good homebrew wouldn't need to replace official spells. It would live beside them and create different effects and take your story in different directions, okay? Here's the second thing that sometimes goes wrong with homebrew spells. They just do too much. So there's a common trap with stacking effects that I see with homebrew spells. It can be like damage, plus conditions, plus movement, plus utility, plus buffs, all in one spell. That's not design. That is actually wish fulfillment. These, not surprisingly, are more common in spells that players may bring to the table, being like, hey, will you approve this? This spell does everything, and I love it. Official spells usually do one primary thing, sometimes with a small, add-on. And homebrew should really follow the same philosophy, especially if you're playing D&D. Other systems may be a little different than this, but as a general rule, most systems really stick to this rule. Number 3, the third thing that can go wrong, they can skip trade-offs, okay? Good spells always have friction, right? They may have concentration, they may have duration limits, there may be a risk to the spell. I think that's actually a really cool one. There may be costs to the spell, maybe rare material components, stuff like that. There's also maybe a setup. They may have like a ritual component. It takes time to set up. If your spell gives power without meaningful cost, it's probably going to warp your table and not have the positive desired intent of being a flavorful spell that really fits into the system and the story. And then number 4, the fourth thing that can go wrong, they only exist for combat. Unfortunately, this is especially true with D&D. A lot of spells seem centered on how they affect combat because it's so tactical. Personally, I love it when we make this subtle change, okay? Many homebrew spells only exist to like deal damage or give combat buffs, but some of my favorite and the best spells in D&D, in my opinion, often create situations, not just damage numbers, or they don't, they create the opportunity for more role play, clever problem solving instead of adding combat buffs or taking away combat buffs or whatever. And that brings us to a great example. And I want to go over this first example. Minson's Herdigersation. Now, why is this an excellent spell design? Okay, this is, first of all, shout out to Padre. This is the spell that won the January spell creation contest in the GM Philosophy Discord. By the way, link is in the description if you want to join the Discord. We are almost 600 GMs strong. The community is growing every day. Come join us, hang out, and take part in some of these contests that we run. The next one coming up, I believe, is a story starter creation contest. So hey, we run a new one of these every month. So make sure to join us. And then there's a whole backlog of awesome homebrew content that people have created for these contests. So you can go grab them. There are one-page dungeons, there are enemies, there are animal companions, there are NPCs, there are all kinds of things, magical items. So anyway, boom, it's awesome. So it's a level 2 illusion spell, ritual, yes, casting time, 1 action, 30-foot range, duration 10 minutes, components are verbal and material, a marshmallow, which is consumed by the caster. That's actually really cool. Okay. This is flavorful, guys. This is flavorful. You create an illusion that masks your speech in gibberish. When you cast the spell, choose up to 4 willing creatures you can see. For the duration, when you or those creatures speak, they may choose for their words to be unintelligible to everyone except for those affected by the spell. Alternatively, rather than listeners hearing gibberish, the speakers may choose to create the illusion that an entirely different innocuous topic is being discussed, such as the weather or obscure lecture. The spell does not grant intelligibility where there was none before. Spells of 2nd level or below, such as comprehend languages, do not reveal the true nature of speech hidden by the spell, but 3rd level spells or higher, such as tongues, do. All right, so let's point out a couple really good things about the spell that make it a good example of a homebrew spell. So first of all, level 2 illusion ritual. Okay, we're already seeing something pretty awesome here. We've got some balancing features here that make it really make sense. Like the fact that you choose up to 4 willing creatures, and this spell is only affecting those 4 creatures. It's not trying to affect everyone else in the room. What's actually affected are the targets of the spell, and then all of the rest of what's happening are repercussions from that. So that makes sense. It actually makes energy sense, mathematical sense. Okay. We also see that it's filling a kind of unique and interesting role. It's not competing with Fireball or Fly. It's actually carving out its own niche. It's not even competing with spells like comprehend languages or tongues, right? So it's a communication chaos spell. It masks speech into gibberish or innocent lectures. And this is actually a really cool role play opportunity type spell because it creates a lot of interesting opportunities for things like espionage scenes, secret meetings, prison breaks, cult infiltrations, political subterfuge, right? It's kind of a story first design. And that's actually one of the things I think is most important when you're designing a homebrew spell. Because a lot of the typical foundational damage dealing spells are kind of basic and they're in the system already. Obviously we can create new ones of those if we want to. There's the sky's the limit for imagination. But spells that go a little beyond that into story first design are usually my favorites. It has a limited duration, so it's balanced. It doesn't grant understanding where none existed before. So it's sort of only meant to do one thing, though it could maybe creatively be used in a couple different ways. But it also has an explicit counter. We know that tongues can beat it, right? So this gives it really a professional grade balance. It really makes it fit in well to the balanced realm of things, okay? And it calls out existing spells for interaction. For example, it mentions specifically that comprehend languages doesn't affect it. You can't see through it with comprehend languages, which is really cool. I believe that that's why this spell won the contest, is because it has all of these elements. All these elements that make up a really great spell are incorporated into this, right? Now, let's go on and look at another example. All right, so here's another example of a homebrew spell. This is actually my favorite homebrew spell that I've ever created. It's called Flight of the Lepidoptera. Basically, I created this for a cool wizard character whose spells were all kind of butterfly themed. And she was kind of a cool, fun, nerdy wizard who went to the university. She was kind of a hipster and she liked going to festivals and suntanning at the beach. But she was kind of quirky in that all of her spells were sort of versions of other spells, but they were kind of flavored differently for story purposes to be more butterfly looking and butterfly type effects. And that's where this spell came from. Some of her spells were cooler than others. I homebrewed a bunch of spells for her. Some of them didn't work so great. Some of them were a little strange and underpowered, but this one I thought was actually cool, and it was my favorite one of the bunch. So first of all, let's go through this spell. It's a second level transmutation spell. Casting time, 1 bonus action. Range, self. Components, verbal, somatic, and material. You need a butterfly cocoon. And then duration, concentration, up to 10 minutes. You summon a pair of large, colorful butterfly wings upon your back. The wings shimmer with soft light, flutter silently, and remain semi-transparent. You gain a flying speed of 30 feet. If the spell ends while you are airborne, you gently descend at a rate of 60 feet per round until you reach the ground, taking no falling damage. Okay. At higher levels, when you cast the spell using a spell slot of 3rd level or higher, the spell improves. 3rd level, your flying speed increases to 40 feet. At 4th level, your flying speed increases to 50 feet. You may briefly, for the duration of 1 movement, carry 1 willing creature of your size or smaller while flying. That creature must remain within 5 feet of you at all times, and your flying speed is reduced by 10 while doing so. And then at 5th level, your flying speed becomes 60 feet. You no longer suffer a speed reduction while carrying a willing creature. Additionally, the wings become more resilient. You gain advantage on Constitution saving throws made to maintain concentration for the spell. So as you can see, basically this is a spell that grants personal flight. But notice what I tried to make the spell not do. Okay. First of all, it doesn't affect multiple targets. In fact, it's difficult to even carry someone while using the spell. It requires concentration, which is kind of a balancing thing. It is a gentle descent instead of immunity. So that's kind of like a feature of the spell. The spell is kind of weak, but that added feature can make it safer. That's kind of a thing. It starts out slower than fly and then scales gradually with upcasting. So it's not really a replacement for fly. It's sort of like another alternative you could choose with a little bit of utility thrown in and a little bit of storyline structure, because I love the idea of the butterfly wings. It kind of adds to sort of storylines, like it adds to the aesthetics and the visuals. I think it's really cool. And each upcast adds, the first one adds speed, second one adds some additional utility, and then the third one adds some stability to it. So it's not raw power, and that is intentional. Generally, when I homebrew spells, I think to myself, if they are so good that you would obviously choose it over any of the existing spells there are, it's probably too good. Probably needs to be dialed back. So if anything, it's just a tiny bit weaker than the spells that exist. That's kind of my rule of thumb. Fly still wins for party mobility. Like if you're going for raw, I want to fly as fast and as well as possible. Fly is still the spell. But Flight of the Lepidoptera wins for kind of a personal elegance, and narrative moment perspective. It's different niche, but the same ecosystem, right? So that's kind of why I like that spell. And that's just an example of another homebrew spell that I think has been very successful in my games. I've really only used it for NPCs. No player characters have taken it or wanted to use it, but I just think it's an example of a spell that I've been really pleased with, both thematically and mechanically, that I've homebrewed. And those are the reasons why I think I just explained. So circling back around to what makes a good homebrew spell, here are 5 questions that I believe help to establish the core framework of it. Now, before we dive into these 5 questions, which are really important and I think a foundational part of designing homebrew spells, I also want to remind you of a couple things. Number 1, I run games on Start Playing. If you would like to play in one of my games, which I do allow homebrew content in, so you can always pitch your homebrew classes, spells, subclasses, species, whatever. I run several different types of games right now. I'm running some long-term sandbox games. We got The Darkest Dawn, gritty dark fantasy journey from levels 1 to 20. We have The Blackmire Covenant, a dark swamp cult adventure. This is a 5-session D&D 5e adventure. I've got incidents of that up. You can check out times and listings for that. I also have a pure Theater of the Mind game called The Shattered Crown of Veilcrest Hold. This is, once again, a pure Theater of the Mind D&D 5e. No VTT. If you want to go back to Theater of the Mind, I'm starting it up with this campaign setting. And this is designed to be a 10-session arc, but it could go longer. And it could also move as a segue into a longer term campaign if a group gets together and wants to stay together. And then also I've got several incidences of my new one-shot up, Escape the Time Rift, Cosmic Time Space Mystery one-shot. This is an awesome one-shot where you basically get to work together with a group of people to help figure out why you have been taken up and placed on this asteroid that's crumbling in space-time. Can the player characters figure out how to save themselves from being erased from existence before the time rift closes? Well, that is up to the player characters. Super fun. So check my Start Playing Games listing down below. And once again, I have an ebook. I've recently published this. This was only published last year. The most important ebook about how to run emotionally resonant games that your players will love, that they will keep coming back to over and over again. If you are a game master who wants to run more immersive games that really emotionally grip your players, then I would ask you to check out that. It is still available for a low introductory price, but please keep in mind the price is going to change very soon because I'm getting ready to release my next book. And when it does, the price for this one will go up. So grab it while you still can. Ebook, links in the description, available for a very low price right now. And read it. I have had great reviews on this book. People have said that this is a must read. Definitely one of the most important things I've ever written about running TTRPGs. And I believe it's going to go down in history as being a more important work for basically how to make your games the best they can be. So make sure to check that out. 24 years of GMing wisdom packed into 50 pages on that one. Now, let's go ahead and move forward and talk about these 5 questions that really help you to nail down the framework of your homebrew spell. This is really important. Let's dive into it, okay? So number 1, you have to ask yourself, what problem does this spell solve? Not how strong is it? What situation does it create, right? If you can't answer this simple question, it's probably time to revisit. What problem does the spell solve? Question number 2, does it replace an official spell completely? If yes, it's probably not designed quite right. Right? You probably need to redesign it, revisit it, make it so that it fits into a niche rather than just being like, oh, this is obviously better than the existing spell. It's probably overpowered if it does that. Question number 3, what is the cost of the spell? Okay, there might be concentration, there might be risk. I think that risk is really good to put into spells, like especially if they're very powerful, having some level of risk. I've done it where you even have to random roll, and if you roll below a certain number, when you cast a spell, you take some damage too. Just even a risk like that is cool. Maybe there's greater setup time. Maybe you have to set up for a ritual. I also think that this is good. I also like it when you really jack up the complexity of the material components. Like, it's a big difference to be like, you need 1 gold coin versus like you need the heads of 3 different breeds of goats, and they need to be hung upside down from ropes from an apple tree. This condition is an absolute must material component of the spell, and then the goat heads will take the energy from the apple tree and be consumed to cast the spell, right? So obviously there's going to be a lot of legwork and just effort put into even assembling those material components. So I think that is a very good way to balance out the cost of a more powerful spell. Right. You can also limit the number of targets, obviously, limit the range. There are a bunch of ways to balance it, but you always need to ask yourself, what is the cost? And if you can't answer this question in a balanced way, it's probably time to go back to the drawing board on spell. Question number 4, does it create story? Okay. Good spells create story moments. So with my example of Flight of the Lepidoptera, this helps to create story moments, I believe, because it isn't quite as good as Fly, but the visual and the kind of moment that happens when a character creates butterfly wings, I think is kind of awesome thematically, obviously in kind of a beautiful and elegant sort of action flavor sense. Well, if we go back to Menson's Herdigersation, we have that, their speech is masked in gibberish. This obviously could create story in so many ways. Maybe they're having a meeting in front of the big bad or whatever. They could see moments of comedy if they're in like the king's court and they all start talking about the weather, but they're actually having a conversation about what should we tell the king, right? So this creates a lot of story moments. You always want to look for that. With my spell, with the idea of the 3 goat heads, it's like there's story involved in just going around and collecting the goat heads. This creates story. Just gathering the material components itself lends to story, much less like assembling this complex material component costs and using it to fuel the spell. Okay. And then final question, how does it scale? There are some spells that are just useless once you reach a certain level. It's like you would never take those spells again. I kind of think that's a shame. I think that spells like that are generally not designed super great. Obviously, there are just weaker spells, but I think that a great spell will scale. And that part of that is story, but part of that is utility and making the spell interesting and different enough that it fills an interesting niche that even at higher levels, a character would be like, I don't really want to not take that spell. It's so whatever, so interesting or so unique or so flavorful, or it adds so much utility. So you can do this by adding upcasting options, right? You can increase the speed, the utility, the stability of it. You could even increase the raw damage of a thing. You could give it different little effects. But honestly, I think that scaling has more to do with the initial design of the spell and kind of how it's useful rather than, other things. For example, if we go back to Menson's Herdigersation, this spell is a 2nd level illusion spell. So, at 9th, by the time you're taking 9th level spells, if you ask yourself, well, should I take Menson's Herdigersation as a spell? Well, honestly, if you're in certain situations where you want to mask your speech a lot, this remains an effective and interesting and fun spell, even for like 18th, 19th, 20th level wizards. Are there other spells that kind of could achieve a similar effect? Yes. but they're not exactly like this spell. So even as a lower level spell, the utility of it makes it cool to take even at high levels. That is called scaling a spell properly, in my opinion. Now, with that being said, I would like to hear what you think. Drop me a comment. Let me know if you've been homebrewing spells and what your takeaways are. What are your rules of thumb? How do you do it and keep it balanced? Do you even allow homebrew at your table? Tell me yes or no, and why or why not. I would love to hear what you other GMs are doing out there at your game table. Always enjoy listening, reading the comments, and keeping the conversation alive. So please feel free to drop your thoughts, tips, tactics, philosophies about that in the comments, and let's keep that conversation going. And friends, I want to wrap this up with a bit of practical GM advice, okay? If a player brings you homebrew anything, especially a spell though, don't ask yourself, is it too strong? Is it so strong that it's going to break the game? I mean, this is a question that you do want to ask, but sometimes we get so caught up on this that we don't delve into some of the more subtle questions, which might be, what niche does this spell fill or this homebrew fill? What does it compete with? Like, let's examine it. Let's compare it to what exists and see what it's like, what the power level's like, what niche it fills. What story moments does it enable? And then what does it cost? Is the cost high enough? A lot of times the spell isn't necessarily overpowered. Sometimes it may seem that way because the cost is too low. Also keep in mind that when players bring you a homebrew thing, a lot of times it's not because they're trying to break the game or they're trying to be all powerful. Yes, there are some munchkins out there who will do this, but for the most part, players might bring you homebrew because they just care about the story of their character, and we should empower them to care. So personally, I'm of the mind that we should allow homebrew. We just need to be a little careful not to allow game-breaking homebrew into our world. And then if it does end up breaking the game, we might have to kind of retcon a little bit and say, okay, I didn't realize it was going to do this. Let's retcon a little bit. Maybe the gods come down and place a unique magical effect, or maybe the natural boundaries of magic impose a little bit of a weakness onto it to make it balanced out. You can find ways to justify this in game without it being weird. And honestly, reasonable players should understand that you're going to have to balance things out sometimes. Anyway, there you go. There's my 2 cents on that. Once again, congratulations to Padre for winning the contest for the month of January, the Homebrew Spell Contest with Menson's Herdigersation. And hey, guys, make sure to join our GM Philosophy Discord so you can take part in the conversations there. I appreciate all of you. Empowering Game Masters to run better games is the goal of the channel here. So I will see you awesome people on the next one.